today we have the lovely Steph on to talk to us about archaeology. We're super excited. Your page is very fascinating, very interesting. Like, even when I discovered you, I was just like binging all your TikToks, like, oh my goodness, I need to learn everything about like all of these discoveries. So thank you so much, first of all, for coming on. We're super excited to talk to you about your journey and kind of your experience in this field and different topics within the field. But yeah, let's just get started.
Yeah, the first question, we just wanted you to take us through your academic journey and what you're currently up to.
Oh, I think it's been pretty normal. I did my undergrad in Australia, like quite close to where I live in Sydney. And it was a 3-year degree, and it was a Bachelor of Archeology in Anthropology, which I know is a little bit different from the US, where archaeology is like a sub-discipline of anthropology. But in Australia and also in the UK, they're like separate fields, very separate. So it's also a little bit different in Australia, even because archaeology was in the Faculty of Arts. So it was really connected with history. And so the whole purpose of the degree was actually to try and connect the arts and more of the sciences. So hence why I have my major is technically anthropology, which was social anthropology. And then I have a nice little minor in ancient history because I threw in some of those. So that's why I like to still say I'm a bit of a historian. And then I had a few years break. COVID kind of happened in the middle, worked as an archaeologist, and then I went back to university to do my master's at Durham, which is where I'm now doing the PhD. So I've been here now for quite a few years.
No, it's really cool that you were able to get breadth as well across like these kind of different disciplines. I always say like if I had majored in a non-STEM field, history would have been what I did because I'm super into just world history as a whole. But I think it's good that you got to touch so many different things. And how do you feel like that's kind of inspired, like what do you call it, the path that you're currently on?
Even though I'm not like an anthropologist now in any way, because I think I definitely looked at that job market and thought, I think that'll be even harder to get into than archaeology. So we'll commit to archaeology. I really like having that background because actually I've been using it in my PhD because sometimes it gets an issue with, and it's probably true of a lot of fields that you can, when you really niche down, and sometimes people are only looking at everyone else in their field and they don't look out. So I quite like having what, especially for the UK, is very different. Like my theoretical background is far more in anthropology than archaeology. And so that's somewhere where I've been struggling. I had to actually go back and learn some archaeological theory, but it's been good to have the anthropological stuff, just especially when it comes to interpreting my data or interpreting what I'm looking at and trying to understand. I can, pull on those anthropological theories, and at least I know where to start researching. It's just very useful for that.
No, I'm sure it's been very helpful.
Yeah, honestly, I think anthropology and ancient history seem like an amazing background for
No,
archaeology
exactly.
specifically. Like you were a straight shooter with that one.
Yeah, I was very committed. I feel like a lot of times people are like, oh, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to study. I didn't know. And I'm like, to be honest, I decided archaeology and I committed to it. I didn't actually get the grades to get into the Bachelor of Archaeology. So I got into like a regular Bachelor of Arts, and then I just treated it like I was in archaeology because you could take any courses you wanted to. So I just look at what the requirements were for archaeology, and then I just transferred after a year because I was like, I know this is what I want to study. So I haven't deviated ever really from that.
It's very
And what
bad who knew who she
inspired
was
you for
from a
that?
very young age.
Oh, for archaeology, it was I didn't want to have to learn language.
Um,
So for the uni I was looking at, like the one that was near me, they're really good for ancient history. It's Macquarie Uni in Sydney, like very, very good for ancient history. But all of the bachelors for it, it was requiring, like obviously if you're going to be an ancient historian and you're going to be studying the Romans, you have to learn Latin. If you're going to be studying the Greeks, you have to learn ancient Greek. And then the Egyptians, obviously they're learning the hieroglyphs. And I was just like, oh, I don't know, because I was thinking about going into teaching, and so being like a high school teacher for history and English. And I was like, oh, I don't really know if I want this. And I think I was 17, and my poor mother was like, well, you need to decide what you're going to study. And I probably yelled at her. And I went into my room and I just opened my laptop, and there was archaeology. And I thought, oh yeah, I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was 7 because I read a kid's book that featured an archaeologist going on adventures. And my logic to become an archaeologist was, well, in this fictional book, the guy went on really cool adventures. I want to go on really cool adventures. I will study archaeology. And oh, look, I don't need to study a language for it. That was as much thought as I put into it. And I think I then walked out of the room, and my mother's like, you've never once mentioned wanting to study archaeology ever. So yeah, it was literally just there we go. And here we are, like 10 plus years later.
But you could definitely tell it's the field that you were meant to be in, and we can see the passion, like when you speak about it, even on your page. Like you have a very kind of engaging personality as you talk about it, and so I think I always think it's fun to watch people nerd out about like their specific disciplines. And so actually that transfers to my next question about your current research focuses on Iron Age Oman, investigating different settlement patterns, trade routes, and social structures. And so I want you to give us some fun facts about that time period that you've kind of discovered through doing your PhD.
Oh, it's a period that's really innovative. So again, when I studied my undergrad, the reason I have ancient history as a minor is because I was going to be like a Roman archaeologist, because I so distinctly remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not going to study prehistory. Imagine studying a culture that doesn't even have a written language. Like, that's insane. And here I am getting my second degree in a culture that doesn't have a written language, and that I think I'm like one of the only people in the UK studying this specific period and region, so that's quite exciting. But I think what I've come to really appreciate about it and just find fascinating is the fact it is so innovative. It's during this period you have camels being domesticated, and that's coming out of what's now the United Arab Emirates and Oman. And you also have new irrigation systems happening because it's right after what's called the Bronze Age collapse, which is a slightly familiar story maybe to some people of climate change. It's getting drier, harder to access water, and basically it's these essentially underground channels that are being dug to access groundwater. And it follows the exact same logic as your stream is drying up. What are you going to do? You're going to then dig into where your stream is coming from to try and find more water. And that's essentially how these get made. But it's coming out of a region that previously it was thought a lot of this innovation was coming from the empires that kind of surround the area. So you're thinking about the ones that are in Mesopotamia or what's happening in what's now Iran. But archaeology has sort of shown that it predates the emergence of some of these empires, because where the specific period I'm looking at, Iron Age 2, is happening is in this real lull moment. So you have all the, think about the big ancient empires of the Bronze Age, the Mesopotamians, the ancient Egyptians, like they're doing everything. The Bronze Age collapse happened, which is a complicated topic, but basically it was just, there was a lot of issues going on, social, climate, again, probably a very similar story to what we're hearing. Everyone's struggling. These empires can't sustain themselves anymore, so they all kind of retreat on themselves. And before you have basically the new empires emerging, this period of a couple hundred years, you have this period of innovation in Oman and the UAE, which is a period that isn't studied. It's what archaeologists would call a peripheral zone. And kind of in a period of time you would almost consider peripheral, it becomes a very big player. They basically, I don't want to say take over previous trade routes, but during the Bronze Age there were a lot of trade routes. The empires were running them. The empires aren't there. But I like to think people were like, well, if the foreigners could do it, and they were coming to us because we've got tons of metal, that's what they're coming to the region from, and we can trade ourselves. Like, we don't need the empire. We can just do it. And that's what they just kind of get on with life. And like, I love that, because it's not, those dramatic moments in history. It's literally one of the silences of history when these really cool things are happening.
No, that definitely makes sense of how need kind of predates how things are shaped and how things develop, of literally just kind of like you need access to a certain thing, or you no longer have access to a certain thing, and that now is going to determine, like you said, settlement patterns, trade routes, discovery, migration, which is another of like, migration is just such a human thing in general. We've been doing it literally since we developed into Homo sapiens species. And so I think it's always cool to see what major events in history led to, and also like how one singular event completely changed the trajectory of an empire or civilization. How maybe
Mm.
if that had been avoided, how would our world have shaken out to look today? So that's very cool.
Yeah, and honestly, I was gonna say about you talking about how it's like not one of the most exciting or like, a whole bunch of wars or other things going on in history. I've always thought, and like I don't even know if this is like actually correct, the like having the space and the time to not worry about like, a current famine going on, a current war going on, or something else like that is like maybe very like important and influential to like what we emphasize in like grade school, allows people to have that like creativity and the space to like do things. I think about COVID a lot. Not that there wasn't something very important going on, but definitely people not having as much obligation in terms of like a 40-hour work week and being on lockdown. I think it definitely allowed for a lot of people to explore things that they wouldn't have previously touched, or just like allowed for a lot of creativity and innovation that was like born out of that period itself that might be under the layer of like the original like big thing that people are looking at.
Yeah, and like life continues in all instances, even as something as dramatic as COVID, which I'm sure, in 1,000 years' time, there'll be also people having podcasts who will be studying what happened, and I'm sure that there will definitely be a pre and a post. There will be stark, and probably in the archaeological record even. But yeah, like it's so true. Like it was. I mean, I think back what it was for me. In some ways, it was deeply traumatic, like horrifying, true, like actually horrifying. But then it also, to me, really showed the resilience of humans, like even my own resilience, that I was like, wow, there's like one part of my brain, like I remember standing at a window and looking out when I couldn't like leave the house. And I was saying to my mum, I was like, you think about wars and that, and like you can understand not leaving the house because there's a bomb going off. But what do you mean there's something invisible out there that could, kill me? Like that's the I mean, it obviously didn't happen. It's not in some ways, but that's sort of a way of processing it. And then I was like, in the same breath, I'm also like, oh, I'm really getting into cooking at the moment. Like that's what I did for most of COVID, is I cooked for my family. And that was so much fun, and I got to experiment. And so, yeah, just that even with quite awful things going on, you can persevere.
Exactly. I am not ready for the COVID documentaries or the podcast in 50 years. Like when
Oh
I'm like
no, it's kind of
70.
happening now. No, I just went to a museum. What was it, like 2 days ago in London, and it
Mhm.
was talking about health, and so all different crises and different things.
Mhm.
And in the gallery, they had a painting that had been done. The art it was the artist's sister, who I think, who was working on as a nurse in the NHS on a COVID ward, and it's like, what you consider, you would see, you imagine like a king or a queen posed like that, a very traditional, I would call it a traditional portrait,
Mhm.
but she's wearing like a modified builder's helmet because they don't have the proper PPE. And I kind of stood there and I'm like, oh, like there's already art museums are already talking about it, and it's been 6 years. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it's crazy how the turnaround is. Like, obviously, we're like around 6 years out from the initial kind of like major shutdowns. And I feel like I've already seen like some like revisionist history in regards to COVID and how things just like, and you've already seen people kind of say things that just didn't necessarily feel like your lived reality. And honestly, that's part of the reason why I find archaeology really interesting, because
The North
there
remembers.
is genuinely
But like
like
the North remembers, and some of these things, yeah, no, I feel you. I'm definitely like, babe, it's only 6. I'm not that old. Like I do remember my
exactly.
period.
And I'm just like, I love the idea of like, again, like studying and like actual like quantitative measures, record keeping, and like putting a profession and like evidence behind things people say, because it always matters in the long run. And that's why I wanted to ask you if you can just give us a rundown of the brief history of the introduction of archaeology as like a career, because you briefly did touch on how it's just been a very long-standing field in history itself.
Yeah, so I mean, technically, some of the earliest archaeologists are actually from ancient history. So ancient people were studying other ancient people, and so that's actually from Mesopotamia, from the Neo Babylonian Empire. One of their last kings, I think it might have been the last king of the empire, was what was called like an antiquarian. So basically, someone who goes out and collects ancient and old artifacts and things that they kind of like. And it was his daughter who made a museum. So she made the world's first archaeology museum that was intended for education. And when archaeologists went and excavated it, they were like, hang on a second, we're like translating the words and everything, and this is a museum label. Like they literally excavated that. So in some ways it's quite an old field, but for it to become a profession was, I would say, aroundish this probably the start of the 20th century was really where it started to become more formalized. Before that, you'd had people who were antiquarians. So if you think about people who were just going out and just digging for treasure, basically, they're just glorified treasure hunters. If you think about any big museums, a lot of their collections will have been donated from people who were antiquarians that they wanted to decorate their houses. They just wanted cool stuff, which, you know what, on one hand, sure, go for it. And there was, yeah, a lot of interest driven by Europeans, especially in their own history. A lot of interest in ancient Greece, ancient Rome. Actually, when Bonaparte went to Egypt, that's when you started to get a lot of mania about it, a lot of interest in ancient Egypt. But yeah, it was sort of the interwar period, kind of in like the 1920s ish. There was also earlier in the 1910s, but obviously world wars kind of put a little bit of a stop on archaeological endeavors. But that's where it kind of developed from, and it's just kind of got more and more professional as it's gone on and become a career. It's sort of no longer are we just grave robbers or treasure hunters. It's like an actual discipline. You know, we follow the scientific method essentially. So yeah, kind of been
I,
since then.
with what you were saying about Egypt mania, like I remember hearing about how like in the UK and stuff like that, there would be entire like parties dedicated to like mummies specifically, and like
Mm,
unwrapping mummies, and like having a mummy was like the hot thing to do, and kind of just like how that spread. And you see this like we've talked a bit about like how there was like a focus on India at one time. Now there's like a focus on Japan, and it's interesting to see how, as our world continues to
mm.
globalize, how kind of different cultures kind of get exported and people really pay attention. And I've heard Egyptians complain all the time about like, I am not like my ancestors, I have nothing to do with that. And every time people meet me, like, because the most common depictions of what Egypt looks like is specifically from
Mm.
ancient periods, like when the pharaohs were still ruling, and they're like, guys, like I'm not nothing like that. But it's fun
Yeah,
to
like it's been
see.
2,000 years, guys. Let's move on. Like
No,
things have happened in
literally.
Egypt
Let's
since the
update with the
pyramids, I
times.
swear.
Exactly. But humans are cute though. Humans are cute
Yeah.
because I think it's with what you were saying about the older museums of just like they also were interested in their ancestors and what happened before them
Mm.
and like how their civilizations and societies developed. It's just very cute to like think about it. Like they also were like, like I wonder what they were doing 100 years ago. Like
Yeah, I think it's like one of the most natural careers to like come out of just human life is
Mm.
being curious about what was before us, like and having like sonder for people who came before us and the fact that they also lived a full life and they also had very individualized and specific experiences and trying to gather from that individuality and then like even their social experiences as much as we can. The Egypt thing that you were talking about, Ileana, was so funny to me because I definitely think that the time in which a country gets popularized, especially in Western culture, is almost kind of like the time in which it's like stuck in people's mind and you kind of get
Mm.
frozen in that time
exactly.
period in the way that people think about you.
Mhm.
And I also think the fact that there's a lot of archaeology development in Europe, and then we have like all of these interests in these like different countries internationally,
Mhm.
like how the interest does come, how do you decide what even is a good dig site for a place that might be unfamiliar with, and like outside of knowing for a fact that like there are like artifacts there, like how do you delineate this is a good place to go and look, and also what are some of the requirements necessary for archaeologists to be able to dig in an area, especially when we talk about places like Egypt, where a lot of the kind of like big flash things that people like, again, are mummies or things that people might think are like sacred or might have a lot of like laws or like legal frameworks behind them before you can like disrupt them.
I mean, there's almost like a couple of different questions in there, because I would say the requirements like is very much, at least talking about the modern day, the legality of it, because I mean, especially somewhere, I mean, Italy is also the same. They're very, very strict about needing permissions, and even when you find artifacts, you need to like request numbers, so then it's like kept centrally, like the records of everything that's been found. Egypt, brought in laws, what was it, in the 70s, I think, that like banned artifacts being taken out of the country because so much had unfortunately been looted and taken, without the permission of, modern day Egyptians. So yeah, there's like a lot of rules and regulations. Even in Scotland, where I was digging, there was a castle, and part of the land was, it's like a registered heritage monument, so there's a lot of legalities associated with it, but the rest of the land was actually owned by Lagavulin Distillery. So the part of the land that was owned by Lagavulin, that's where I was excavating, and they were like, yeah, sure, go ahead. There's like it was a structure on there. It was just like a building in one of the many conflicts up in the Highlands and Islands. It had been destroyed in like 300 years ago or something. So we were just digging it and cleaning it and trying to keep dry. But I was talking to the people who were actually excavating in the castle, and they were like, oh, because this is like like a scheduled monument, when they were requesting permission to be able to dig, as part of their application, they had to say down to the centimeter how much they were going to dig, and if they went beyond that, like it would be shut down. Like someone could come out, check, and if they did more than a centimeter. So a lot of places do have really, really, for good reason, there's strict laws, but really, really strict requirements, and that's mostly to protect the archaeology. I mean, I don't necessarily think that there's one good, like you could just look somewhere and be like, that's a good place to dig. Archaeologists will dig anywhere. Like, you talk to some archaeologists and people dig through straight clay and stuff. And I mean, I've been thankfully never had to dig through that. But I mean, I've dug in the desert, which is sand. Like, think of exactly like dry sand on a beach, and trying to shovel that neatly into a wheelbarrow without the sand flying everywhere is a skill. And I learned I can do just about up to my shoulders. I can lift. The minute I'm lifting above my shoulders, I can't do it. Just couldn't do it at all. So yeah, archaeologists will dig anywhere, but some of the ways of identifying a site can be as simple as local stories, legends, even local landowners. People might notice stuff. Like when I was in Bulgaria, there was a local farmer who asked us to come out to his watermelon field, and we ate some delicious watermelon as we went around and picked up all the pottery. Like his whole field was full of Roman pottery. And so just from looking at the scatter, we could be like, oh, because there's no what we call fineware, like fancy pottery, it's all very normal, just regular everyday household stuff, that it probably isn't like an impressive villa or something, but that there was so much pottery there, it was like, oh no, there is definitely archaeology here. There are definitely buildings somewhere under the ground. But you can also use what's called ground penetrating radar, or GPR, and so you can use that to basically scan the ground, and it can show you if there's anything underneath. Also looking at old maps. That's a really good way. So in the UK, you have what's called commercial archaeology that's part of the construction industry. So before any construction project happens, so I was on some where basically they just bought up this farmer's field, but before they go out and dig, we go out, dig a whole bunch of trenches just with big machines, big diggers, and just see if there's anything in there. And the one I went onto, there wasn't anything, so it was really easy to record. It was very neat, but we dug like 30 trenches. And so then we found nothing, so you can just tell the construction, yeah, you can go ahead. Other times, if you do find something, it might be as simple as, we don't want to dig that up because it's expensive to dig up archaeology. And once it's exposed to the air, there's a lot of things you got to worry about, like, well, where's it going? Who's going to store it? And there's not a lot of storage. We are running out of storage. So, the archaeologist will write up a report. And in some instances, especially in the UK, if you get a new build, if you ever know that the plan of housing project is changed, or if all of a sudden there's like a nice green patch in the middle, or there's a big roundabout, or there's a playground, that'll be where the most interesting archaeology was. So they can change, because it's, why dig up a Roman villa? Like, also there's a lot of Roman villas. If you don't have to dig it up, why? And archaeologists like that because it stays in the ground and is protected.
Okay, I see. So there's a lot of different methods that you guys kind of cycle through to kind of get to that. And I feel like that's very interesting because going back to what we talked about previously when you were talking about how it's very much a social science, like based in anthropology, history, understanding human behavior and interactions, but it still draws a lot on what do you call it, quantitative data analysis and scientific research, that because you have to analyze material remains and all of the different ways of preserve, for example, like oxidation when it like reaches the air after like how many thousands of years of being buried in a tunnel. So can you kind of take us through what some of those more quantitative research methods kind of are?
Oh, I say archaeology, you can go as scientific or as social as you want with it. So anything you can do in the sciences, you can apply to archaeology. So it can be as simple as recording the pottery you find on the surface, and then, you know, you have that data, you could get the GPS locations of the pottery, or you could like say, oh, we've got this 1 square meter, we're going to count. And then based on that, you could calculate how many pots there are or how big the spread is going to be. You could predict, do a lot of different statistics and predictive stuff. But yeah, like, I mean, I even think about what I'm doing in my PhD, even as something as simple as using the GIS systems, so the mapping systems, and plotting out the location of the settlements I have. Like, it's a lot of the same skills and same knowledge that people in different fields use. Like, we use a lot of the same, programs and technologies and everything, but just to study maybe something that's a little bit older. But I think part of some of the things I've had with my PhD is because it's based on data collected from a survey, that there's some quantitative data that wasn't recorded, that if I was to, if I had the funding to go back out and like, do another season of work, there's definitely more of that quantitative data I'd want to record. Yeah, because the original project was more interested in just capturing a big picture image. So they recorded some quantitative, like they counted a shit ton of pottery, like a lot of pottery. But it's just in different ways I think it could be beneficial.
I see.
But
Does
yeah.
funding of these expeditions depend on maybe like the size of the site and then like how many, like just walk us through, because I know obviously it's probably very, very expensive to get the tools, materials that you need even to like dig, and then preservation and then transportation. But do you have any like rough estimates, or is it just very dependent on everything?
It could vary. It varies by country, would vary by project, would be varied by so many different things. Like, but it's not cheap. It's definitely not cheap at all. And I mean, I know at least for even a simple commercial project that I was on, where it was personally, I wouldn't want to buy one of those houses, but they'd sold some land around an airfield to build houses. And I'm like, well, I'm digging in the ground and I can see, like, it was just a small airport, but I was like, I don't think I'd want these houses, if I'm honest. And even that, like, that was just an initial search, and we did end up finding archaeology. But even that, it was very basic. Like, we're talking 3 archaeologists out there, 1 machine that dug the holes, like a little bit of paper, and tools themselves that archaeologists use to dig haven't really innovated at any point. Like, it's just trowels and shovels and hose. Like, pickaxes, like the most basic things. Like, I was always told, like, when I first started archaeology, that you can get all of our tools at like a local hardware store. It's more like once you start doing the more fancy analysis, like if you're like, oh, we need to use machines like to do ground penetrating radar, or we want to look at dating, like the minute you start that type of technology, it gets a lot more expensive. But actual archaeology can be done really cheaply, and that's why there's a lot of volunteer projects, or what's called community archaeology in the UK, because if you can, I mean, people could do archaeology with a toothbrush. Well, you do. I mean, we clean artifacts with toothbrushes. It's as simple as that, and water. So to certain extremes, but it depends what the needs of the project are. And like, obviously, we would all like more money. I think even the most expensive project would probably be like, oh, we haven't been able to do this analysis, or we haven't been able to do this, or go, to be able to analyze a bit further.
No, that's so interesting that you say that because I felt like that was more so kind of like a pop culture media like interpretation of like how archaeologists dig. It's just, like having the
No.
like little toothbrush brushing away the dust and stuff like that. And I've always wondered, especially considering
Mm,
like some artifacts can be very like one fragile and two culturally
mm.
sensitive. Like I was like, do they have to use like very specific techniques? Like does it take a specific amount of time to learn how to dig properly? Because I know if I just came out there, I'd just be doing whatever. Okay. Everybody would be mad at me in about 90 minutes. So I was just
No,
like,
no. That's why you go on a field school. So I actually did a specific field school for human remains, because that was a skill that I was like, oh, this feels like a specific skill that would be useful to learn. Because when I was doing my undergrad, I didn't know what I wanted to specialize in. I kind of just wanted to learn all archaeology. And so I was like, oh, I don't know, this was my logic at 19, was that to make myself as employable as possible, I would get a little bit of experience in a lot of different kinds of archaeology. So the previous year to doing this field work, I'd studied pottery in Italy. So basically I'd spent a month in Italy drawing pieces of pottery. Going insane drawing bits of pottery, and really made me go, do we need to be doing this? Made me reevaluate a lot. But the following year, because I was in my third year of my archaeology undergrad, and I actually hadn't dug at all. And so I was like, well, I want to dig. And I'm like, what if I've studied and I'm going to find out I hate digging? So I was like, okay, what opportunities? There was a field school that was human remains, and I went, I've never seen a dead body before in my life. And I went, you know what the smartest thing to do? Pay a couple grand to go to Poland to dig up human remains. And I did have the thought going out there, like, I've seen dead pets, I've seen dead, but I've never seen like a real life human in front of me. And I kind of went, what if I freak out? What if I've paid all this money to go on this field work? And then because I hadn't done human bio, never seen a cadaver. And I was like, I didn't, spoiler alert, but there was genuinely that thought of, oh my gosh, what do I do? Will I freak out? It was almost an experiment for myself. But that was really good to go on. All field schools feel a bit dodgy when you go on them, but I quite like some of the stuff they said there, because they were really focused on giving dignity to the remains. And that's something I've always seen from people who specialize in excavating human remains. It's a lot of respect. Like, in this instance, they were like, don't even give the skeletons a name, because they had a name in life. I've seen some people, some archaeologists actually say, no, it is useful to give them kind of a nickname, because that helps to humanize. So there's sort of two sides to that argument. But it's a huge thing with ethics. And the one in Poland digging those remains, where they were then going to be studied, I think, for like 7 years. And then they were being reburied in the local cemetery. So the cemetery we were excavating was the middle of a farmer's field at the moment. So in some ways, if we weren't there digging it up, the farmer they eventually just would have been plowed, and it would have got destroyed if he was digging down. And so I kind of like that, the nearest village, they had sort of, I don't want to call it like a mass grave, but they had basically just a big section of the cemetery where all the skeletons, after that period of time that they were studied, they got reburied. And you're like, this is a middle of nowhere, as we call it in Australia, whoop whoop. It's the middle of whoop whoop, Poland. And so it's likely that the people we were excavating, because it was only about 400, 500 years old, are likely the ancestors of the people living in the village. Like, the village probably just moved location. So I quite like that it was in some ways going back home. But it is something that's, really ethical. Like, there's a lot of ethics, especially when it comes to human remains. Like, in Australia, it's a massive no-no to disturb Indigenous Australians' artifacts and heritage. And so, as far as I'm aware, because I've never worked as an archaeologist in Australia, but when I was applying for jobs and talking to people, I'd asked about, oh, what tools do you need to bring? And they were like, oh, no, to be an archaeologist, all you need is like a hat, water bottle, and like a compass, because they don't really dig. It's far more survey and just recording of sites.
Very, very interesting to kind of hear about. And I, first of all, I fully resonate with your statement about like not being, I've also never seen a dead body, whether as a cadaver or as, I've only seen like not human hearts, but I've seen animal hearts. That's like the extent of the biology I've seen. So I can definitely understand why you were a bit concerned, like coming into it blindsided a little bit. But to Gold's previous question and just kind of what we've talked about of just always keeping the ethical concerns of the field of archaeology in mind, just due to the nature of what's going on, how do you as an archaeologist kind of navigate the ethical concerns with potential disruption of burial sites, cultural locations, potentially appropriation of artifacts, other sensitive topics that are just inherent to that field?
I think for me, it's always like whatever the people in the country want, like they kind of get the final say, or like whoever's, I don't want to say like closely linked, but like if there's any kind of descendants, like even if it's hundreds of years, like if people are like, look, we really don't want people to be disturbed, then yeah, not disturbing. Especially like being someone not from the Middle East, studying the Middle East with the history of people from the continent that I'm from, studying, there's like a lot of ethical things there. And that's why, I mean, the projects when I've worked on them, like in Oman, it's been like an Omani-led excavation. It was Omani archaeologist, and I always like that when I'm on projects with primarily archaeologists from that country. But yeah, I mean, regarding ethics, I mean, the discipline of archaeology I'm in, landscape archaeology, I don't have to dig at all. Like it can be solely based on survey and like satellite imagery. So can be completely non-invasive. So there's a lot of times like the ethical concerns are coming up when it's looking at artifacts or when it's looking at human remains. And so if I don't have to deal with that, it's kind of good. But even like when I was excavating in Oman, we were excavating a settlement that then had been reused as sort of a burial site, because if you're going to have to build a tomb out of stone, why go and get your own stones? If there's an abandoned village, you can just reuse the building stones for, like, obviously convenience. So in order to get to the archaeology underneath, we had to remove some burials, and I ended up taking out the burial. So there were like 6 in a row, like all connected, and the rest were all empty. Like I think they told me when I arrived that, oh yes, some of these burial chambers didn't even have pottery in them. Like they're completely just sand, like nothing. So it was just, why did you go to all the effort of making them if you're not going to bury people? But the very last one, the smallest one, had a child in there, and when I'd been digging it up, I was talking to the lead archaeologist, and I was like, oh, it's a bit hard sometimes. And he went, yeah, like I prefer not digging human, like if I can avoid it, I'm going to avoid digging human remains. And so there's some older burials that are on the hilltop looking down that are from the Bronze Age. And he went, yeah, like those ones, there's no need to dig them. Like we know what they are. We know they're Bronze Age tombs. We know there's probably going to be people in them. I'm like, yeah, you could dig them and find interesting information. But like, if you don't have to, don't. If like, there's no need to, like you have to go out of your way, which was kind of all right. It was a bit sad taking out the child, because there was very little left, because Oman's so dry, like nothing organic is lasting, and that includes human remains. So it sort of can be quite difficult sometimes to find human remains. And in this case, you could barely see the outline of a body. It was so fragmented, her bones. It was like, I always illustrate to people, I'm like, all of her bones could have fit into the palm of my hand. It was like so little that was left of her. But more of what was in there was the jewelry that the child had been buried with. And so it was 2 silver earrings. There was obviously a necklace, like I was getting the beads from sort of where I thought the skull had been, because there was nothing left of the skull. There wasn't even any teeth, which was kind of surprising. I thought maybe there might be a tooth, but there wasn't even any teeth. And then both of her wrists and both of her ankles had bracelets and anklets on them. And it was really cute because the bracelets was like a snake. So you can definitely go into shops and see it now, but when like the bracelet ends and there's just like a little snake head. And I think that it was more seeing that than seeing the bones, that for anything, that when you think about the ethics, like I certainly thought about that. I was like, this was a child that was obviously missed, was loved. I mean, buried with that jewelry, it's not maybe the most expensive, the most fancy, but like there's still effort behind this. There's intention behind it. And I was a bit sad to put her bones, because it's assumed female. She was called the Little Princess, but considering how many remains were left, it's a bit, then you get into the ethics of saying that they're a female or a male. But I didn't like that I had to put her in plastic, because I knew that she's just going to sit in a box, like in the museum, in the archaeology department. And I was like, in some ways, personally, because you're not getting anything archaeological from that. Like from her, there's nothing. It's you could crumble it in your hands and it's turned to dust. That I kind of wish she could have been reburied on the site somewhere else. They could, just put in a little corner or something, because it's a really pretty location that they chose. It's got great views of the water, and I was like, you know what? If I was to be buried anywhere on this landscape, this is kind of the location I'd want. And as well, like taking like I knew like we had to take. I say we had to take her out as if not like a gun was being held to her head. Like it was a choice to take her out at the end of the day, done for a reason. But I don't think it ever makes it easier. But it was done, I would say, as ethically, and that's where I think it comes from the personal. Like there are ethical standards of dealing with human remains. Every country has their own, but then there's also industry standards like that exist. But I also think as professionals that you should have your own moral compass, and like I think it should be taken seriously. And I think most archaeologists and anthropologists who work with human remains do this. There is so much respect. Like I've heard of people that when they've been working with human remains, even children, they'll talk to them, like say good morning, or they'll tell them what to do. And that's actually something I did. I the first time when I was cleaning human bones, I started talking to them like I'd seen people on Grey's Anatomy do. Like if you ever see like kind of someone who's like a comatose patient, they still like, oh well, we still talk to them because they should know what's happening, and it's to sort of remind you that they're still a human. And so that's why I kind of did it. Sort of it's a odd thing to say that maybe my conscientiousness about ethics isn't necessarily about the people needing respect, like that inherent thing that I do think people deserve to have, whether they're living or been dead for 100,000 years. But I also think it comes down to you as an individual, that I would never want to become so blasé and callous and casual about what I was doing. Okay, it's a little bit odd to be like, I've got someone's radius in my hand and I'm scrubbing away with a toothbrush and I'm getting like a kebab stick to kind of clean out the dirt. Like it's almost as far from humanity as you can get in a way while dealing with humans. And so for me, it was very important that I sort of have my own internal ethics, and that it's something that I still, I don't know if grapple's the right word, but it's something I do consider in every instance. Like it's not something like, oh yeah, I just dug out this kid and I took out her jewelry she was buried with. Like when I took it out of the ground, the jewelry, and I'm putting it in the bags and I'm labeling it, like I try to put as much intentionality behind that, because I was like, you know what, the last person to see this was the person who put the jewelry on the kid, who is probably a loved one, whoever that loved one is. And so for me, I'm like, I am now always connected to that person. And I want to give as much respect and give that much respect for the action that that person took over 2,000 years ago. And I'm like, I want to give that same respect. Just because I'm taking it out doesn't mean I just rip it out, pop it in a bag. Like, no, I take my time, I think about it, and I just, and it's very selfish, but it's honestly for me, because I don't want to forget that they're humans. Yeah, which is an odd thing to say about human bones. You don't want to forget they're human.
No, but I could
understand.
definitely understand why you would feel that way.
Yeah, there could be a desensitization. And I think that's why it was like a good comparison to the medical field of like consistently, coming across like people who have already passed, or just like working with humans in a way that is not like intuitive and natural, like like sawing someone's bone in half so you can put it back together, or even the same thing with like having like respect to a cadaver. So I definitely think like having things in place to give you that reminder is super smart. And I also just like love the idea of kind of defaulting to like people who have indigeneity to the land, or people who have been there for hundreds of years, because every culture is super rich and super different, and like what people find okay and not okay can be so different based off of something like super small. And it's really something that people are raised in. Like it takes years for them to even fully understand, if they even get to that point. So coming in as somebody who has desires to learn about that culture or interact with it one way or another, I always think like defaulting to like the natives of the land does make the most sense. And I also like thinking back to your previous comment about how like in that small area in Poland, like these people's like a lot of the archaeology you're finding there might be the like direct ancestors to the like people who are currently living today. And I also think that like enhances like their care for them and like their desire to want what's best for that history, the archaeology that you guys find, and just like the location and the land in general.
For
Yeah.
sure. And
It can
anybody
be
really
really different
does.
as well, like crazy different. Because even in England, like if it's a Church of England burial that you're digging up, it has to be reburied in a Church of England cemetery. And I was talking to someone about this, and he was like, "Oh yeah, especially little parish churches. Obviously get very, these are small communities. People have lived here for hundreds of years. They can get really, really particular. Like there was one instance where it was like, no, the church is sinking into the ground. Like it is like we need to get into the foundations. Like we're gonna have to we're gonna try and avoid as much as possible people, we're gonna have to. And the local village was kicking up a stink, and it was like, well, it's either the archaeologists get in so then the engineers and the builders can get in to make sure your parish church doesn't collapse, or your parish church is collapse. Like there's no good options. But then they were saying that they'd worked on another church where they were like, oh no, because they're Church of England, so they're Protestants. And they were like, oh yeah, you can dig up whoever you want. It's fine. They're Catholics. They're already going to hell. And you're like, okay.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Oh,
there
Big
was like,
Mama. Mhm.
so it's quite, because I think sometimes people always assume that, oh, people always have a deep respect for the dead and there's always there. And it's like, absolutely not. Some cultures are like, go to town. We do not care. Like even in the Poland one, it was quite funny, because I say funny, quite crude, that a very rude message had been written on the sand over where we were digging by some of the locals, and it smelt like pee, so we think maybe that the locals had also peed. And we're like, these are literally your ancestors, likely. What do you mean they're like peeing on them because you don't like the archaeologist there? Yeah. So that's the thing.
The
People
things
sometimes
people
think
will
like, oh,
do.
it's always about respect, it's always there. And sometimes it's like, they're like, do whatever you want. And archaeologists are like, no, we have ethical standards, guys, we swear.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no. And I feel like sometimes people almost like, because of things that have happened in the past, they kind of carry that into like modern day standards of just like the ways, especially for like global South countries, so Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Latin America, where it's just kind of like the ways that foreigners have kind of come into their land, dealt with their history, dealt with, their cultural traditions. There's like a guard, there's a protectiveness. And so to your previous point of like, it's about working with them to understand that this is to further everyone, and you're only going to work within the constraints of like what's acceptable to them and kind of what is important to their culture as well. I think empathy, I always say like empathy goes a long way. Like there, you can never have a shortage of it when dealing with things. And I feel like it's as human as it can get. Like we all have to die someday, and we will all have our burial with our loved ones, and we will all be placed somewhere. I mean, unless you turn into ashes, and even then how your ashes are dealt with. And so I think having, like you said, that humanistic element of understanding that this can happen to all of us, and we're all interconnected through dying, basically.
Yeah.
And so the way that we deal with, treat the dead and respect them, because that is also an impact of like how we will be treated in the future. But yeah, no, I definitely think the ethical concerns can always be confusing to navigate. But like you said, it could also be researcher dependent. It could be country dependent, culture dependent. And so it really is different across the globe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and honestly, we talked a lot about like dealing with legal stuff and dealing with the natives who live on the land and other things like that. And I've always also wondered, like, because there's so much crossover when it comes to the social sciences, like even going back to like your personal background and working in anthropology and studying ancient history, like do archaeologists tend to collaborate often with like historians and paleontologists, and how do they like enrich your findings and like um just contribute to the study of archaeology?
I mean, again, that it depends on the project if it's going to be involved. I feel like probably more so historians versus paleontologists, though there can be kind of crossover there, because that's again when, how far back are you studying humans? Like, are we just talking about Homo sapiens, or then when you start crossing over into other species of Homo, like that's and also it can be, there's a difference in disciplines across countries, which again, like the US has like the anthropologists kind of at the forefront, while archaeologists in other countries can kind of bleed in. So there can be that kind of crossover to an extent. Though I will confirm archaeologists do not study dinosaurs. There are no dinosaurs being studied. But I mean, especially for historians, like it can be incredibly useful to use historical sources to check your own information. Like, I mean, even looking at my own PhD, like, yeah, the culture that I'm studying, they don't have a written language, but everyone around them does. We've just had the Bronze Age full of empires. So like I'm looking at historical sources, and that's why I'm, you know, reliant on those researchers. I mean, I read a whole paper, these people, I mean, I'm no linguist and not in the languages, and they were talking about the different words and the phrases and how you could tell where people had come from. They're like, oh, this is not West Semitic because of XYZ reason. So that's why they were talking about like the origins of what they think the ancient name for the word for Oman was. And it was like this whole paper written about it, which is like completely beyond my wheelhouse. Nothing, absolutely not. But incredibly useful for my PhD, because if we want to be talking about stuff like trade, it's like, okay, is anyone writing about our region? So then you're looking at the historical sources. And one of the few mentions we have of the region during the time period is from Mesopotamia. So I have to use, you know, historical sources and see what historians have been interpreting. And also, even just when it comes time to understanding archaeology, like we're interpreting what materially is there. So yeah, we can study cultures that don't have a written language, but we absolutely do. Obviously, we study ones where there is a written one, and so we can sometimes check information. We can verify stuff. Like we recently got evidence, like physical evidence, of Roman gladiators being killed by, and I guess fighting lions. There was some human remains found in York that they compared the teeth marks to those of lions and big cats and stuff at a local zoo. So I suppose in that instance, that's archaeologists collaborating with zoologists and stuff. So it really can be as diverse. Yeah, like anyone can be involved. Like my PhD, I mean, I'm looking at the geology, I'm looking at geography, I'm looking at climate science, I'm looking at political science, business. I've been studying, global trade networks. I've been also looking at anthropology, microbiology. Even I've got 2 microbiology papers in my archaeology PhD, just so I could make one argument. But yeah, like it really, you can work with anyone. That's why I say, like, I always like to think that everyone's secretly working in archaeology, no matter what they're studying, because whatever it is can be applied.
For sure. No, I definitely can see how there will be crossovers because there's like the chemistry, the biology, the history. And once again, I feel like that is something that is always like shaking people, trying to remind them that you can't like extract STEM from the humanities. Like you can't try to treat them as like completely separate fields, because everything that we do in STEM is for what we're working through in our actual human lives. Like a lot of STEM pursuits are just to improve people's quality of life, and vice versa. Like humanities have their own biological role that they play, and it's beyond just survival, but just are we thriving? So I think it's interesting to see all of the different ways that can kind of be tied into your research. And the next question we wanted to ask you were, are there any major findings that you feel have kind of shaped or drastically altered your perception or understanding of human history? And what are some common misconceptions about humans that kind of can be a jar to what archaeological findings have kind of produced?
I feel like the ones that have really changed it for me were actually ones that have come across while I've been making content on my account. Because that's actually, I'm going to be honest, I feel like I've learned more archaeology since starting my account than I did actually studying it at uni in any way. Or at least so many more diverse stories as well. And just, yeah, I mean, some of the big, I say big ones for me personally, it was a really interesting paper. And it wasn't just the subject, which was about a disabled individual from like prehistoric Vietnam, essentially. I can't remember what dates they were, and it was something wrong with the legs. It was like I can't remember if it was an accident that had happened. They weren't able to walk, but it was something really. It was extreme, because the article was using as an example of how, you know, even people who have been disabled throughout history, you know, we haven't just sometimes how people like to look at the past is that it was, you know, just, oh, everyone was out for themselves, that's an inherentness to humanity. And it's like, no, of course it isn't. And so that was kind of, you know, the article was an example of that. But there was a real, and I always remember it, a really interesting point that they made. It was the first time I'd read it, because I'd read a lot of similar ones about disability and like in the archaeological record and how you can see evidence of support and help and care and da 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 da. But it talked about that the individual, the person who you know was experiencing this this physical disability, and was saying the fact they survived isn't just up to, you know, their community, but it also speaks to the strength of spirit of that individual. And I always, for me, that sort of made me rethink, I don't know, rethink, but reconfirm that it was a right thing to sort of look for the individual in the history. Like, yeah, you can have these big conversations about the archaeology of care and what that says about us as a species, da da da. But then also, it's like, yeah, okay, but you can give someone as much. I mean, we know that today in healthcare, you can give someone as much care as they want, but you know, if someone decides they want to go, like people do just give up sometimes, and obviously this individual didn't. And so that really, to me, I thought that was quite a beautiful way of looking at it, and it expanded that conversation that I think some people might find quite groundbreaking and changing, just the concept of that we've always cared for people with disabilities. For me, it pushed it that bit further. So the other paper that I really liked, it was looking at rock art, and it was something I didn't even know you could study, but they were able to tell from the finger marks the ages of the children that were making the art. And then they were obviously looking at where it was, and it was really high on the wall. And what they figured was probably happening is that parents were picking their kids up and were like basically helping their kids trace, like having their fingers on top and like, you know, making the marks. And I'm like, I mean, finger painting, I think, is something that most children have probably done with their parents or carers at some point. And that to me was just such a human element as well. And it was, I mean, obviously I knew about rock art, but I'd always been like, oh yeah, it's adults doing it, or it's like not literally guiding. There was something about that act, the fact, you know, that they were like, oh no, we can tell from, again, I don't fully understand how they're able to tell it. I think they just look at averages or something of what an average 3-year-old's finger is or something. And yeah, it's like, oh yeah, this 3-year-old is being held up by their parent or an adult, and they're helping them. Like you can see the adult's finger marks next to it. And I was just like, that's such a human thing. That's so normal. It's something someone has definitely done today. It's something my parents did with me. And I don't know, I felt like that made me rethink human history in a little way and sort of rethink archaeology, because it was again such a more human story. It wasn't just, oh, look at this cool rock art, look at this really old rock art, isn't that amazing? It wasn't, in some ways it wasn't about that. It was about that human story, that human connection. And so that's what I've always, yeah, just really liked. And yeah, it's one of my favorite parts. I always love finding the humans.
Yeah, I love anything that's like a through line of like community in like human history. I think I felt like a lot of relation to like even the discussions that you were having about ableism. I think there's like a lot of defaulting to like every man for themselves, this kind of like archaic idea of like, oh, back in the days we just like let natural selection run its course. And
No,
again, I
literally.
think that like is such an abused term, and it is like lost some of its meaning as people try to use it as a way to like promote like ableism or other ideas like linked to bigotry. And I in my like neuroscience class, when we were like learning about like the neuroscience behind like other animal behavior, and then we ended up like narrowing it down to apes specifically. And there's so much like information regarding like queerness, regarding polyamory, regarding disability, that it's just like the information that we have is so ajar from like whatever like idea you guys want to have about like the animal kingdom and like what's natural and how things have always been. So like I love that like reassurance of just like the strength of like the human will to be in community.
For sure. I feel like you've also, one of your TikToks talked about like a young boy that I think he got like bit in the skull by
Yeah.
a lion, and you talked about kind of like how he survived due to his individual will as well as his community. And I think that's another good example of what you were talking about, of like it's not the same across all cases, because just like the human beings that exist today, they were their own individuals. And I think it's great that, if anything I've learned from this episode is just how connected we are to people in the past. Like I love hearing about all of the different methods that you guys utilize to kind of bring back that history while also respecting like the people that were very much living, who, like you said, Gold, with like had lives just as complex as ours, mothers who worried about their children, you know, lovers who had a wedding and like had their own marriage traditions, like people who played, or parents who were helping their kids do something. Like those are incredibly human things across all different timelines. And I feel like in the past, like there's been a very like Eurocentric view of like how life looked back then that has been kind of imposed on us. And with better research and also better ethics in this field, we're getting to see the diversity of the human experience. And so I think that's wonderful. I think the work that you do is wonderful. Whenever you complete your dissertation, I'd love to read your paper about Iron Hegemon. I think that that would be very, very
Totally.
interesting. So
I will
definitely keep
send
us
it to
looped.
you. I literally,
Exactly.
anyone who wants it, just give me your email. Once it's out, I'll be sending it.
Oh, for sure. I know that will be like my little tea for the time, like nighttime, just like reading through and seeing like what they was up to when the wells dried down. But with that, thank you so much for coming on this episode, and we're gonna move into our next section called Bits of BS. And for anyone that's new here, we basically just go over funny, annoying, shocking, surprising moments that we experienced when we were trying to get to our BS, our bachelor's, or really just any school, because academia will put you through it, y'all. It will genuinely put you through it. And Steph, since you are our guest of honor, will allow you to start.
This has literally been like 10 years at this point, probably over 10 years, and I still remember it, that I had to write in one of the essays for my class. I was writing it on the topic that the tutor specialized in, and it was like 1,000 words. It wasn't even that big of a deal. It was like small. It was worth like 20% of my grade. It wasn't even like a final essay. It was just, you had to pick a topic for the tutorials, and just one of those weeks, that's when you wrote it, when it was that week's topic. And I'd asked the lecturer, I was like, oh, this is your area of research. Do you recommend readings? And he'd recommended something he'd written, which, I mean, obviously it's his area of research. I'd cited it. I'd been like, you know, Dr. Da-da-da made this comment. His feedback was, talking about himself in the third person, mind you, was, oh, Dr. Da-da-da wasn't the first person to come up with this theory. And I'm like, well, you didn't cite anyone else, did you? And I'm there like in my second comment, I referenced correctly. I referenced you. You gave me the, you didn't reference anyone else. Like, am I meant to go back to find the very first person who ever said the sky is blue? Like, it's like, what? I did the right thing. He was like, oh, and I'm like, also, you're talking about yourself in the third person. I was like, come off it. I'm like,
that would have been my last
grade.
straw. That would have been like what really tore it, I think. Like beyond just the critique, the third person would have got me, because I would have to slam my laptop shut, because now it's unserious.
Honestly, yeah. No, it was, I think I did. I just looked at it and I went, I'm not dealing. I was like, you know what? The grade I got, I think, was okay-ish. And I was like, I don't, no, that's it. I'm done.
No, literally. Hate when they have
Still makes
something
me
on the
angry.
rubric, but the rubric doesn't reflect the like random
Oh my
20
gosh, like
requirements.
give me what you are using to grade. Just tell me, like, why are we doing this?
Well, why would they do that when they could have you like literally guess and try to mind read just to be completely off base? Because really what they wanted was something completely different. Like
Like recommending your own book in which you know what was cited, and then being like, well, like, girl, come on, did you not know? Like, get with the program. Like,
I don't trust your sources. Mind you, the source is you. Like the source is you. You are the
That's
source.
literally what he was saying. He's like, this source is dodgy, and it's like, but this, you are the source. What are you talking?
like honestly, like at that, by the end of the conversation, I'll be like, I understand why you don't trust the source. I don't know if I trust the source anymore either.
No,
Like,
literally.
Honestly, no, it's, yeah, that's university. Sometimes I think is, you're just like, why are you making it's just making it more difficult for everyone. Like, it's not that just, what are we doing here, folks? But yeah.
yeah.
Really.
Honestly, my bit of BS, like I feel like when I learn about other animals in neuro, or even when I learn about like like really young kids, like it gives me a similar feeling of like hearing things about archaeology where it's just like, oh, like they're kind of like me too. And like I think I had this moment in like my like one of my core neuroscience classes freshman year, learning about like when it gets cold and like what Japanese macaques do with their hot springs and how like there's clearly social hierarchies and like
You've told me about this.
and basically like the mothers and the children of the mothers with like a high social hierarchy are allowed to be in the hot springs when it's cold, and there's basically what is their equivalent of a bouncer, like a man, like making sure that the like Japanese macaques who are like on the low social hierarchy like do not get to go in the club, like do not get to go in the hot springs. And I was just like, is this heartwarming? Not really. Is it kind of like heartwarming? Because I feel like this connection, like you're kind of like us, like maybe not even for better or for worse, like even our worst
No,
characters
literally evil, just
might be
like us.
sharing.
I'm so obsessed with the idea of them like interviewing people to be the bouncer. Like, you know, there's like the head matriarch is there, and you know all of them are coming up like, oh yeah, and she's like, how confident you were turning away these people? Because then I don't know, I feel like when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, that is kind of so complex. I'm like, what other complex things are going on? Like how deep does this drama go? And now I desperately want like a documentary, like a Kardashian-esque documentary of them, like maybe narrated by the Kardashians, possibly. Like, give me the tea. What is the drama?
No,
Exactly.
literally.
Like, what do you gotta do to be the Japanese macaque, like frat doorman, being like, you're not getting in?
No,
Yeah,
literally. Do you
and
have a
is there issues
wristband?
like
Do you have
what
a
if he decides to
wristband?
date down and like he's dating someone who's like not allowed in the hot spring? Is there issues like with the ones in the hot spring? Be like, wait, are you gonna let your girl in?
On the
Exactly.
next
Or like, what if
episode.
a kid, like one parent is like higher hierarchy, another parent is
Oh,
lower? Like, do the kid get to go in the hot spring with his mom? I
No,
don't know.
literally. On the next episode of Keeping Up with the Macaques, we'll go into. No, that's actually hilarious. No, I remember you telling me about that, and I was like, "Tea for me." Like, not they say you need a wristband to get into this club, baby. Like, you can't just sneak your way in. Okay, my bit of VS is also kind of connected back to like history. So for those of you who don't know, I was a biomedical engineering major in college. So at one point, I decided to take an engineering ethics class, and I thought that that would be very interesting. And one of the things that we talked about was actually the invention of the bicycle and how, like, obviously, like mechanically, it's really not too bad. Like when you think about like the rotation of the wheels and stuff like that, but it actually became a very huge invention, not only for like the way that it served for like personal transportation, but also because women were starting to ride the bikes. And so that became a huge issue because like we're wearing these like super huge like hoop dresses. So then clothing in turn had to modernize to fit the fact that women were now riding these bicycles. And then also on the like socio-political side, it was just kind of like, okay, now these women have like freedom of movement and stuff like that. Now they're starting to think about other things that, you know, they want access to. And so something as such like the invention of the bicycle, like people didn't think about the other rippling effect. Like it actually served as a very big starter of the feminist movement and the starter of autonomy and freedom for women, simply because they now had the ability to wear pants instead, which was like a huge transition, and then B, took that as a sign of like, oh, we have a little bit of freedom in this area, and we're starting to like go out on these bikes, ride with other women, talk with other women while we're riding these bikes. We can expand that into other things that we want to see. And so how even like little engineering things that have happened in the past have once again shaped the ways that our political and social structures have developed over time. And I think that's very cool.
That really shows how everything's connected, because I never would have thought about that, all that, but when you say it, it makes sense. But like, I've never once thought about the bicycle being very revolutionary.
Exactly.
That's amazing. That's
Like,
really
I love that
cool.
story.
No, literally. I'm like,
Get into things.
freedom to pass. Now when I look at bicycles, I'm just like, I have this added appreciation because it's something that once again could be a very simple piece of technology, but actually serve to concretely make women's lives better at that point. And then I mean, there's technologies that have done the opposite, but we won't get into that today. But listen, human history is complex. You know, a lot of moving parts. And so it was great to hear from one of the people who actually take the time to study what those time periods concretely look like in the physical realm as well. And so thank you so much, Steph, for coming on. This was a lovely episode.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. of course. Make sure to check the required reading in the description box if you guys want to see some of our sources. And Steph, if you want to send over sources, we can put them there as well. But with that, remain curious, remain educated, and always remain critical. We'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.
Bye.